All right, so we are not starting with section 1.1, as I said earlier. We are going to start with section 1.2 just because, I don't know, I just think 1.1 is kind of a waste of time. So, yeah, absolutely. I would do that. If I was taking notes, I would put the section at the top so that you know where you're at and all that kind of stuff. And there we go. As far as taking tests, we probably will not wait until we get to the end of the chapter to take a test. Okay, I've never taught out of this particular book before. But sometimes I will. I'll just give you a test on that chapter, depending on how long that chapter is. But sometimes I might stop in the middle and give a test, you know, maybe from section 1.2 to 1, whatever. I don't know. It all depends on how long these chapters are. And again, this is the first time that I've taught out of this particular book. So the first thing we're going to do, geometry is full of, it's basically another language. It's kind of the same as algebra in some ways because you use a lot of algebra. But the language is so different. There's so many words that you need to know. So usually we start off with definitions. But we're actually going to start off with 3 words that don't even have a definition. They're called undefined terms. So let's write that. So we're going to have 3. This is a little bit too short for me. But anyway, I'll figure it out. Is that all done? Okay, you can bring that up to me because I'm all hooked up to this. Thank you. All right, so we're going to write 3 undefined terms. And I got to get used to writing on this thing. I haven't written on it all summer, so 3 undefined terms. And the first one is the word point. We're going to be using that word all year long, okay? It's really, we're giving a description of what a point is, but we're not technically giving a definition. If you want to really get into the differences between an undefined term and a defined term, you can read that. They talk about it in the book. I'm just going to skim over that a little bit. But our first word is a point. Remember, this is not technically a definition. This is just an explanation or a description, okay, of what a point is. And you're probably thinking, well, isn't that what a definition is? Well, kind of. Anyway, let's write this down. So it's a dot or a location with no length. Now this part right here is important. With no, my width, sometimes I do that, a W and a little slash, that means width. With no length, no width, and no thickness. All right, you're like, well, how does something like that even exist? That's why we don't have a definition for it, because it doesn't really exist. It's just a description of where something is, okay? So an actual point, we can draw a point on a piece of paper, but that just describes where the point's located, all right? Because remember, a point doesn't have any length, it doesn't have any width, it doesn't have any thickness. So if I was to draw a point, what I would do is I would put a dot. And you're like, well, Mr. Hamrick, that has width, that has height. If it was on a piece of paper, it would have some thickness, okay? But we just use a dot to represent where the point's actually located. Everybody understand that? So a dot is just a location. It's a place, okay, in space, somewhere. That's what a point is. And we describe a point with a letter. And we always use a capital letter. So anytime we talk about points, we use a capital letter. So if I had a point right there, a dot, I would just put like P for point. You could use any letter of the alphabet. It doesn't matter. A lot of times we just use P for point, okay? It's not really a variable because it doesn't stand for a number. It's just a description. It's a name, all right? So it's really not a variable, all right? But it's just a letter that represents where that particular location is, all right? And we say, I'm going to write this down, we say, and I'll put it in quotes, point P, all right? And it's always a capital letter, okay? So a point is always a capital letter. Let's keep going. Scooch this up. Number 2 would be a line. Again, you'd think there would be a definition for a line. I bet you anything, if you look it up in a dictionary or Google it, there probably is a definition for line. But our book says it's one of the undefined terms. The reason it's an undefined term is because a line is made up of a bunch of points. And if a point is undefined, then a line must be undefined as well. It's kind of weird. I'm not going to worry too much that you completely understand that part. Basically, it's this stuff that I want you to understand, like how we label it, how we say it. That's really important. That's something we're going to be using all year long, okay? So a line is a straight set of points. Let's write that down. Is a straight set of points extending infinitely. What does that mean, infinitely? Say that again. It never ends. That's right. Okay, it never ends. Extending infinitely. Infinitely. Did I spell that right? Oops. Oh, my writing is terrible. I need this to be just a little higher. I'm kind of like a little bit down, so my writing is even worse than it normally is. Oh, it doesn't end there. Sorry. In one dimension. This is in the book, but I'm writing it down just so you see it. In one dimension. And of course, if a point doesn't have any width or thickness, what do you think is true about a line? It's not going to have any width or any thickness either, because it's made up of a bunch of points, isn't it? All right, so that's what they say. So with no width or thickness. So you can't measure it. You can't measure a line. You can't measure how wide it is. You can't even measure how long the thing is. Why? Because it extends how? Yeah, it look like a second grader writing right here, but infinitely, right? It keeps on going forever. So what does a line look like? Well, I'm glad you asked. There's a line. And it doesn't have to be like completely horizontal like that. I mean, it could be like this. It could be like this. All right, I'm just going to make it horizontal just for fun. And then what we would do is we put an arrow at both ends. Okay, that's what a line looks like, okay? Some people say, well, that's a line. Well, technically, that's not a line. We'll talk about that in another section. That's actually a line segment because that actually has a beginning and an end. All right, that doesn't extend infinitely, does it? But what do the arrows represent? The arrows represent it keeps going what? Forever in both directions. Exactly right. So it doesn't have a beginning, doesn't have an end. What does that sound like to you? Think more spiritually. No beginning, no end. That's right. God has no beginning. He has no end. We can't even imagine that because everything in our life always has a beginning, doesn't it? Everything that we see has a beginning. But God doesn't have a beginning. He doesn't have an end. And that's what aligns. So there you go. There's your spiritual application for today. All right. There won't be a whole lot of times we'll be able to do that. But at least on this one, we were able to put that in there. All right. You have a question?
Yeah, I was just actually going to mention something when you were talking about the line. The one passage of scripture that came to my mind was the one where Jesus says, I'm going to separate you from the sins from the west.
There. That's right. Now, is there an east pole and a west pole? No, but there is a what? North pole and a south pole. So when he says he's going to separate our sins from the east, as far as the east is from the west, what does that mean? Infinitely, right? So that's kind of interesting in Scripture. He doesn't say north and south. He says east and west for that particular reason. So I think that's kind of cool. It's a good thing. All right, let's label this line. Okay, we have to label it. You can actually label it a couple ways. One, you can label it with a lowercase letter. And they use the letter M. You could use any letter that you want. Sometimes, like in a book, they'll probably make it like italicized, but little lowercase. That's why I put that little swooshy thing on there. That's a lowercase letter. So we could call this line M. So what would I, oops. Oh, it does this sometimes. Why does it do that? I don't know. I think it's got these buttons on this pen, and sometimes I think I accidentally push a button and it makes this do something weird. So anyway, what do we say? We say line M. It's a pretty easy way to, okay, line M. That's a weird looking M, but you get the idea. Again, I'm getting used to this thing. I haven't used this all summer. So we could call this line M. We could call this something else. If you put at least 2 points, okay, so put a point here and a point here, and if we label both of those points, how do we label a point? What do we use? We use a what? Say it. A capital, right, a capital letter. And you could put it on the top or the bottom. It doesn't make any difference. We'll just use C and D. There's a capital C's and capital D's. You can use any letters you want, okay? You can use any letters you want. All right, so, but there's a point C and a point D. So if you didn't want to call it by its lowercase name, because not every time when you see a line, will you see a lowercase letter? Sometimes you'll see points on the line, and you're going to want to use that, all right? So there's point C, and point D. What you're going to say line, line CD. Now that's what you're going to say, but you're not going to write it like that. You're not going to write it with the word line right there. Here's how you would write this thing, okay? So you'd write a C and a D next to each other. And to tell you the truth, it doesn't matter that the C goes first or the D goes first. It doesn't make any difference. You could write DC. It would be the exact same line. It would represent the exact same line. But what you do is you put a little line symbol over top of it. You're going to see that all through the book. All right, so that would be line CD. That's how you write it. This is how you would say it. Everybody got it? All right, so that's what you would do here. And most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time, we're going to refer to a line by at least two of its points. What if I stuck another point in here and made it E? Now, there's a bunch of things that I could call this. Let's scooch this up. So what are some things I could call this? Remember, I'm only using two. I'm not going to call it CED. You only use 2 points if you name a line. But it can be any 2 points on the line and in any order. It doesn't make any difference. So I'm not going to write all these down, but let's go through them. I could call it C what? Just say it out. CE, or I could go backwards and call it what? EC, or line EC. Let's use the word line in front of it. I've already said line CD, or I could say line what? DC. Or I could go line ED, line what? DE. I think I hit all of them, didn't I? Did I hit all the combinations? Yeah. So if you have multiple points, on a line, you can name that line by using any 2 of the points in any order. Doesn't make any difference, all right? I'm taking a long time on that because I think it's really important to do. I'm running out of time, so I'm not going to write this down for you, but it is in the book. Do you see? Somebody give me a page number where the undefined terms are. 7? Okay, look on page 7, because I just have notes. I don't have the book in front of me. If you look on page 7, there will be one more word. I'll write the word down, but I'll let you write it down in the notes yourself. And that's a plane. Okay? And I happen to have, I think I put it over here. Yeah, there. This is kind of what we use to represent a plane. It's like a surface, exactly right. Okay. This is how we usually draw a plane on a piece of paper. A plane is basically just a flat surface, okay? Now, pretend this paper, it didn't like wave or anything and it was completely flat. A piece of paper would be considered a plane. The floor is a plane. Give me some other things in this room that would be considered a plane.
The top of the desk.
Okay, the top of the desk. Who said it? The ceiling, the walls, okay, the doors, anything that's a flat surface. We said desk twice already. So anything that's basically a flat surface is considered a plane. And that's what it's not a definition, but that's what the description of a plane is. It's a flat surface made of points, right? So we don't define points, we don't define a plane. So it's made of points extending infinitely in 2 dimensions with no thickness. And of course it has no thickness because it's made of a bunch of points. Points don't have any thickness, neither does that. Okay? We good with that? And that's how you represent it. Now, how do you label it? Well, I'm glad you asked. This is how we label it. You could use a lowercase letter. Let's use the letter L. Okay, that's my lowercase L right there. It kind of made it cursive looking just to make it look like a lowercase. All right, so we could call this, what do you think? What would I call this plane? I wouldn't just say L plane. I wouldn't just say L, plane L. Okay, I would say plane L. Okay, that's what I would call this thing. All right, pretty easy. So really, we're just learning another language. That's all we're doing today, learning the language of geometry. We're going to be doing this a lot this year because there's a lot of new words that you probably haven't used in this particular situation before. Here's another way that you could name a plane. All right, what you could do is you could name a plane with 3 points that are in the plane. This represents the surface I'm on right here. Now remember, the surface, technically, when I say the desk represents a plane, I say it represents. It's not actually a plane, because a plane is made up of a bunch of lines. So the lines do what? Extend infinitely. So a plane does what? It extends what? Infinitely. Very good. Okay. So when I say the desk, the top of the desk represents a plane, does it have edges? No. Now, I can't draw a plane that extends infinitely, so I have to put edges on it, right, the way we have to draw it. But a plane technically goes forever. This floor itself is not the plane. It represents that plane. So if I had that flat surface, and that flat surface where the floor is, where we're standing, if it keeps on going forever and ever, that's the plane. Okay? The floor just represents where the plane is located, the walls and the ceiling and all that kind of stuff. Everybody, does that make a little bit of sense? Okay, so let's just, we'll just use A, B, and C. Now, we don't have like a special symbol like we did for the line. Remember the line, we put that little arrow on top of it? So what we do is we just use the word plane. So I would say either plane L, right? Because you could use it by the one lowercase. And they always put the lowercase up in one of the corners. It doesn't have to be the top left, but it could be in any of these corners. Let me finish this thought right here. All right, so you could also call it plane, and then this time you used 3 letters. Any 3 letters. I could have 15 points in this plane that are labeled, but to label the plane, I only use 3 of them. And again, do you think the order matters? No, the order doesn't matter. I'm a little OCD. I kind of like it in alphabetical order, so I'm going to put plane ABC. But it doesn't make any difference. You could call it BAC, CBA, whatever. Yes?
The point, the L, the lower L, because it's for the line that has...
It's the L just represents the plane. So if I didn't even have these points in here and I had a little lowercase letter in any of the corners, I could call it that. So if I had like a little A right there, I could call this plane A. Now you wouldn't have 2. You wouldn't have a lowercase L and a lowercase A, but you'd have one or the other. Okay, does that make sense? Yes.
How come, like, you have, like, your L as a lowercase, but the A, B, C?
Because they're points. Remember, points are always uppercase. Okay, so points are always upper. So if I wanted to name this line, I could just use one letter, okay, and I would use the lowercase m. Or I could use 2 points. And points are always uppercase. All right, they're always uppercase. Alex, you had a question?
So I was actually going to point out something that's kind of funny with, like, say,
All right, real quick, because the bell's about to ring.
I mean, if something can be located, then it's not infinite. How is it?
Is it what?
If something can be located, then it's not infinite now, is it?
Well, no, it could be. I mean, because you could locate it at every single point as far as you want.
You could show
Right.
that it's infinite, but, like, if it
Right.
can be located, then that on that specific paper isn't infinite.
Yeah, right on the paper, it's not. Right, again, these are just, and that's a good point, because this right here is a representation of a line. All right, here's what we're going to do. I still have half the lesson to do. We had a little shorter class today. So I'm not going to give you homework tonight, but we will finish the lesson tomorrow, and I'll give you homework on that tomorrow. Everybody good? All right.